We'll record the session, just by the way. Welcome everyone to this second event of the Governauts, this new branch of token engineering. Wait, let's make sure we don't have background noises. Please, everyone, switch off your mic. Oh, wait. Okay, welcome again to the Governauts and this panel discussion on reward systems. We have awesome guests. We'll introduce them in a second. Before we dive into this important topics for DAOs, decentralized communities, reward systems, I just want to make you aware of a research group that we are starting soon. This is about reward systems, the different types of reward systems, the benefits, the weaknesses, coming up with better mechanism design, also verifying and analyzing data we have been able to collect in the past couple of months and years from existing projects. So we have real data, and we want to bring together a research team. Livy is part of it, John Anderson is part of it from the token engineering community, plus around 20 to 30 co-researchers from the token engineering community. Basically, you are invited to take part in this challenge, to work with us over the next 3 months and to collaborate on coming up with reward systems improvements. And I'll drop a link to the chat. You can pre-register. So in case you are interested, in case we should keep you up to date, please pre-register, let us know, and then we'll make sure you get an invitation and you'll be part of it. And if you have questions, just reach out. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Livy. Let's kick off our discussion. Looking forward to it. And thank you everyone for joining, particularly to all the panel participants, our speakers today.
Thank you, Angela. Yeah, it's so great to finally have this session we've been talking about for a long time, and just exploring reward systems in more depth, and they have such a complexity, and we've been wanting to bring the people that have been in the forefront of these projects to talk about it together and to brainstorm about possible solutions to the challenges that we have. So I want to welcome Griff from representing Praise, Zach representing Coordinate, Hamad representing MetaCred, and Dr. Andrew Penland from Western Carolina University. Thank you all for joining, and I would just like to pass to each one of you for introducing yourselves and your projects. And you have 5 minutes each to this introduction. And we have a few questions that we're gonna get into, but also everyone that is present is very welcome to submit questions in the chat, and we can pull it from there and ask participants. So if you want to ask a question, just put the question and who do you want it to answer. So I will pass to Griff to start introduction, and then we'll move forward.
Sure. So I'm Griff. Hi. I work with Giveth, Token Engineering Commons, Commons Stack, DAppNode, and a whole bunch of other projects too. But those are where I spend most of my time. And I've been looking at reward systems for the last, I don't know, 5 years. Since the DAO days, there was just like we were just about to talk about how we're going to create rewards in the community, but that didn't last long. So we never really went very far with that. But then we carried that into Giveth because Giveth started right after the DAO, and we were looking at how do we reward volunteers, and the whole purpose of Giveth is like, how do we build economy. The purpose of Giveth at the time was kind of what the purpose of Common Stack is now, which is to build economies around causes and create a reward system for the work that's being done, because so much good work is being done by charities. Why aren't they rewarded? That's just silly, right? And so rewarding volunteers was an important part. So we started this thing called Reward DAO. And the Reward DAO had probably 4 or 5 iterations, trying different things. And while I was doing Giveth and working on those things, I also run a couple Burning Man camps, Decentral and Doge Central, and there are lots of praise experiments in Decentral. In fact, Mitch knows all of them. He comes to my camp. He's our head chef. He's also a Web3 superstar. But we do praise and shame, which was interesting, right? Although one year we didn't do shame. But what we learned at Burning Man, or what it felt really good at Burning Man, where we would praise without quantification. It was just straight up acknowledgement. So we'd have acknowledgement for praise, and then we'd also have, but there would be no quantification, and everything was all lovey-dovey. And we'd praise people, for their actions. And then when we introduced shame, we'd only shame behaviors. We wouldn't actually shame people, right? So we'd be like, oh, I found a hammer out on the ground in the playa. Everyone knows it's supposed to be in the tool corral. Shame, 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 right? It was really fun. And the same with praise. It's like, oh my gosh, Mitch made such an awesome meal. How about we all praise Mitch? Mitch, praise, praise, praise. And it was really fun. And this acknowledgement, without the quantification is half of the battle. It's half of the fun, I would say, with these reward systems, is the non-monetary qualitative acknowledgement. But then, hey, we're trying to build Web3 systems, right? Hey, Gideon. We're trying to build these Web3 systems, and we want to create tokens. So now we have to quantify that qualitative love, and that's where things get messy. I like to say it's like, this is how the sausage is made, right? And then we have to figure out some sort of way to quantify that qualitative stuff. So we do it with the TEC. The TEC, we've done some really cool work around praise, and then we had a lot of research around it that I'm sure we'll get into later. And Giveth and TEC are now integrating SourceCred and the praise system to try to quantify what can be quantified and qualify, and use praise for the qualitative stuff that's hard to quantify. That's my intro. I'll pass it back to you, Livia.
Thanks, Griff. I'll pass to Hamad next.
Hey all, I'm Hamad, also known as MetaDreamer. I've been working in the DAO space for almost 2 years now. Yeah, I've been super interested in sort of better DAO tooling and mechanisms in which we can help to make decisions in DAO and get people rewarded. I've been a core contributor to SourceCred for about a year or just over a year now. And I'm a member of MetaCartel Ventures, Metagame, and MetaFactory, kind of bouncing around those DAOs and, finding the common patterns and, building tooling and experiments to figure out how to better measure and reward value creation. Yeah, that's me.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about MetaCred and what state are you guys at and what has been happening there?
Yeah, sure. So the goal of MetaCred is basically to start to capture and aggregate all this information on value being created and work being done, not just within a DAO, but between DAOs, because a lot of the value created in this ecosystem is not just for one organization, but it affects the whole community and the whole ecosystem. So I think we had this vision of the DAO back in the day, but I think that vision is starting to manifest now, not as one singular DAO, but the collective sum of all the DAOs in the community. But we don't have as much connectivity between the DAOs themselves. So the goal of MetaCred is to be a layer on top of SourceCred, on top of praise, on top of all these different rich data points that we have on people and the work they've done in DAOs, and be able to attach this to our identities and our reputations and explore what that looks like, because there's a lot of considerations there when it comes to privacy and there's a lot of moving parts. So yeah, MetaCred's kind of a shelling point to get people who are thinking about these problems to share and flow information, resources, and data between each other, and hopefully even creating markets around this so we can start to flow capital, not only where, it's like at the intersection of monetary transactions, but we can quantify the value of, opinions and statements and facts, and use cryptography for not only cryptocurrencies, but, crypto data and identity and reputation and all this. And I think that's really like the next major step into, taking DAOs from like validation like phase and, experimentation phase into like, production phase, and, really allowing them to realize their full potential.
Thank you. And I'll pass to Zach.
Thanks, and good to meet y'all. I am indeed Zach. I am one of the core instigators, I guess, at Coordinate. And I also work with Yearn. I'm a contributor at Yearn as well. And then, of course, like many of us, I'm sure, have a lot of other DAOs that I kind of play in. I'm new to this space. I'm almost always the newest person in crypto in every conversation I'm in. I started last year. And before that, so I had a consultancy that we started about 8 years ago called Converge. And it was focused on how to build human networks to solve social and environmental impact. So basically have different issues like landscape conservation or income inequality or migrant rights, and bringing together government and corporate and nonprofit leaders together and sort of building them into now what I would call like an IRL DAO. And so by doing lots of those different projects all over the world, learned a lot about coordination and how humans like actually work together and how they actually balance different incentives, because almost everyone that's part of a network has their day job that they're doing too. And so they're always balancing all these competing rewards. And so when I discovered DAOs, it was kind of a big moment and I got obsessed, and I still am. And so Coordinate, we started originally kind of incubated solving a problem within Yearn, which was at Yearn, they had this grants committee, and they would get petitions for grants every month for people that were contributing, moderating the Discord or translating docs or things like that. What they kind of found is that, people were applying for grants, and it was kind of an arbitrary, process. They'd just be like, I want this much for doing this. And then some people didn't apply for grants that added a lot of value. And they were having to make these sort of apples to oranges decisions about who should get a grant and why. And then they're like, why are we even on this committee? Like who appointed us here? And so ultimately we said, well, what if we just ask the network, like where the value is being generated and how the grants should be distributed. And so we created Coordinate, which is essentially a system where each person in a circle, right, that's contributing in whatever sort of level of task you're talking about, but people get together and can distribute value amongst themselves. So they use on our platform, like essentially poker chips that are called Give, and they pass them to each other, and then whatever percentage of Give they get, that is the percentage of the budget or allocation or resource that they get. And so we built that for Yearn, and then suddenly it turns out a lot of other DAOs are really interested in this too. And so now we have about 30 different projects that are using that have circles set up and are using Coordinate, and we are figuring out how to make it better.
Thank you. Yeah, and congratulations. I saw that Coordinate was the most cited reward system in the Gitcoin survey. So that's pretty cool.
Thank you. I feel compelled though to like asterisk that data slightly, I think, because Bankless is such a huge Coordinate circle that I think it's not entirely representative data, but still it was great to see.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll pass to Andrew.
Hi, y'all. I'm Andrew Penland. I work in the Mathematics and Computer Science Department at Western Carolina University. My story in math is kind of important to know. I was very not a traditional math person all through school. And I sort of came in cryptocurrency through an interest in decentralized governance and alternative currencies. I have experience with reward systems because as a professor now, I have to think about how to grade the class. And even before I got interested in this specific topic, I thought a lot about what was fair about grading and what was important, intrinsic motivation of learning versus extrinsic motivation of learning. I got interested in reward systems and cryptocurrency completely by accident. There was an interesting conversation happening in the TEC one day, and I just kind of jumped on. But what was happening during that discussion is they were discussing how praise was being mapped to something called impact hours, and then how those impact hours would be mapped to the TEC tokens. So I just kind of volunteered to think about that question. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into at the time. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. And I think what I was able to bring to it was precisely what was mentioned a moment ago about how to quantify these things in a measurable way. Now that has its drawbacks, but I read a lot of the literature that's known in cryptocurrency about how resource distribution is handled, and some of the tools that are used, things like the Gini coefficient, the Shannon entropy, the Nakamoto coefficient. And I'm not trying to paper bomb you, but if you're curious about any of the things, here are some good starting places. And it turns out, ironically, just as we were wrapping up this, and I just found this paper this morning, that Vitalik has written a blog post about what the right ways to measure inequality in token distributions are. And his blog article, ironically, is called Against Overuse of the Gini Coefficient. So I've skimmed that and reading it. It's very interesting. But that's my perspective. My opinions about fairness are the same as anyone else's, but I do have some degree of expertise in metrics and optimization and writing code. And I want to give a shout out to Sean Anderson at Longtail Financial, who also played a very important role in doing the quantitative analysis of the praise distribution question.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone for the introductions. And I wanted to bring you all together here and also have Andrew present, because I feel like a lot of the challenges that we are facing is how to quantify things, how to transfer subjective data to objective data, how to find the right metrics for the things that we're measuring, and are these metrics can this metrics tell us something about the health of the ecosystem? So I'll pass around this first question that is for everyone again, but for this to open a little more discussion and for everyone to also, based on these challenges, to write on the chat any questions that you might have. So what are the biggest questions that you see with either with reward systems in general or with the reward system that you work with? So I'll pass to Hamad to start.
Sure. Yeah, so I think the question of like objective, truths is an important one. And, I think it's easy to sort of come to like consensus on what's like objectively valuable or should be rewarded, or how much it should be rewarded within like, smaller groups of people, maybe up to like, 15, 20 max. After that, it starts to like fall apart and different people have different perceptions. So I think in terms of like scaling out these reward systems beyond just like smaller groups of individuals, we need a way to capture like intersubjectivity. So I think it's really impossible to try to come towards like global consensus on some sort of like, let's all vote on what should be rewarded where. Instead, I think it's much better to like come to consensus on a process, and then like just deploy that process. And then if that process has issues, then you can vote or coordinate and come to consensus on how to change that process. But the process should be a way or a mechanism in which we can quantify individual beliefs and statements and values, and then be able to like sum across multiple of them in either like subgroups or, you know, even in a nested format. So Coordinate's a good example of this, where you know, we're not trying to come up with like an allocation from the top down level. Instead, we let people you know, gift each other give on from a bottom up level, and then, you know, the sum of all the gifting of give that everyone did becomes like the distribution. And I think that pattern of like pushing the decisions out to the edges and then quantifying them and then lifting them back up by, you know, running algorithms on it, I think that that is a generalizable pattern that we can start to explore more. And that's how we'll also be able to scale beyond certain communities and, you know, flow value between different communities without needing to like come to consensus between them, or you know, have to fully understand who's making the decision in this other community, and like, you know, evaluating whether or not it's accurate or not. And you know, you have to do a whole bunch of due diligence before you decide like to flow funding in a certain community or direction, like who's going to be managing this, like all this stuff, versus, you know, letting people have that intersubjectivity. And, you know, you don't need a top-down decision making. It's kind of like an emergent group belief that comes out of like quantifying individual statements and values and, you know, running algorithms on them.
Do you want to pass to the next person?
Sure. Zach.
Thanks. So the biggest challenge I see with reward systems is that there are always people in them. And that, like, it's kind of glib, but it's like people, it's always just like, it was perfect. Like, we designed it so well, right? And then you put people in and they are not, each person themselves is like a super complex system full of like really irrational choices constantly. And then you put, the more people you kind of put in, you know, the more complex it gets and the harder it is to sort of design something with that's going to be totally fair and totally work, because people will take all sorts of unexpected turns. I think the big challenge with reward systems that we're experiencing also is just that intersubjectivity, which is also kind of its superpower. But you know, you have 5 different people or 100 different people looking at something and saying and deciding what's fair, you know, and you know, what kind of work should be rewarded. And then you also have this other perspective that it's like, well, the kind of work that's being rewarded is what the system wants to happen. And so balancing those two, I would say, it's like, how do you provide minimum viable structure for people to start interacting and sort of figuring out what's valuable for that project or that community on their own? And then, you know, what is the feedback loop so that there's some kind of self-reflection mechanism to say like, wow, we're really valuing all the people that make memes. Like, is that really what we value? Is that what we want to be rewarding, or do we want to be rewarding other stuff too? And of course, we just want to reward the memes is usually where it ends up. I see Griff nodding his head. So yeah, I think the challenge with reward systems, like how small a structure, minimum viable structure can you do while it's still helpful, so that it's not just total chaos. And then of course, like the more pushing to the edges that you can get, you know, push the decision about what's valuable to the people that are making that value. And that's of course like the big problem we see with corporate systems, where it's sort of like arbitrarily determined from someone who has no idea what the day-to-day is actually like. And I will pass to Griff.
Yeah, I mean, all I can do is echo basically. I mean, the biggest challenge is how do you pass to the edges? In the end, you know, groups of people have a tough time making decisions, and trying to have like a list of people and everyone deciding on who gets what is just a chaos. So really, it's best to have each individual person like make a ranking or give their own quantification as an individual. But then you run into this challenge of, oh crap, how do we get people to actually participate? You know, do we pay people to participate? Like all the people who are loud and extroverted are going to show up, you know, and they're probably going to reward other loud and extroverted people. And so now the introverts that are quietly doing their great work, you know, that don't really want to go into these awkward situations where they have to quantify people and stuff, they get shafted, you know. And so like however you design the system, you're going to be leaving out people by just the dynamic that you're creating, the mechanism of capturing this data that will prevent people from participating. So I mean, that's this like kind of like trying to design the best structure to reward as many people as fairly as possible is really difficult. But definitely pushing to the edges helps a lot. And it's just how do we get that involvement? How do we get people's participation? And I also think that it's really hard to want to, you know, there's a lot of value in division of labor sometimes, right? And so you're kind of fighting against that. You're saying, no, everyone has to quantify everybody, you know, and be participating in this work. And if you don't have that, then you have a very skewed perspective of just the people who are participating and what their backgrounds are. So you're really fighting against a lot of natural things. And in the end, like, unless you have a good way to make it fun, which I think Coordinate has found a way to make it fun and really focus on that, like giving, you know, this isn't like rating, you know, this isn't scoring, this isn't paying, this is giving, you know, and these framings are so critical, and getting the framing right is like half the battle, you know. Praise, right? We're praising people, you know, but then I framed it all wrong. Oh, this is how the sausage is made. Get in there and quantify people, guys. I'm sorry, that was a mistake. You know, we gotta do better framing. We have to make sure it's fun. We have to make sure the quantifiers are treasured and also as diverse as possible. Yeah, I'll throw it to Octopus.
So in addition to what everyone has said, like the social technical interaction is huge, because even with social media, we see that people are not always the same when they're interacting in this digitally mediated way. So we already had like the human aspect of resource distribution, which is a humongous problem no one agreed on. And then you have people coming to this completely new space, and often we bring different expectations about it. Like, what appeals to me about cryptocurrency is not economic, it's about being able to get things done without coercion. Whereas someone else may just be trying to make $1 million. And if there aren't really authentic conversations about what we value, then you can have this situation where people realize they valued completely different things. And they're just now discovering that when they go to give the rewards, because they want to reward different things. I think that's a really big challenge, is the community figuring out what it actually values.
Yeah, there's a really good point that Hamad brought up of creating this emergent belief systems of how people were valuing things without having to pass through a layer of decision making, and that there is like a self and multiple assigning of value happening from multiple actors in the space. So that leads to a question that is something I've been thinking a lot about, on how to move away from the manipulative nature of the systems. Because reward systems, there's a big literature on it that talks about how both punishment and rewards come from the same source of a manipulative system, that you're inducing people to have a certain behavior to have a product of a result that you want or that you would like see happening. So I think we are slowly shaping something else that is not exactly a reward system, but that it has other qualities from everything that I've been hearing from what you guys bringing. So yeah, I want to ask this question of, Do you think there is a way to move away from the manipulative nature of the systems, balancing intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation? I'll pass to Andrew to start, and then if any of you want to complement his answer, feel free to jump in.
I think just for me personally, the economic value has never been worth whatever community I was able to find. So like there was a time in crypto when I was really focused on making money, and it became a complete depleter of joy for me. And this year I have somehow managed to make $0 in cryptocurrency, but I've had so much fun. And I think that ideally, like whatever reward systems we give would be supportive of those authentic things. But then it's like, as soon as we make a reward system, we fall into this trap. So I really have no good answers. I pass to Griff.
There's no good answers for this kind of stuff. I mean, in the end, like you think, I don't know, I like to think of money ideally as happiness points in general, right? And reward systems should be able to somehow capture like, oh, how much happiness, how much joy, how much production, how much like success was this person in this time period? You know, how much did they contribute to that? And measuring that is like, or like, where do you draw the scope? What, you know, what even, it's really hard. And then when you draw the scope, you're naturally creating a game, and you're going to have people jumping through the hoops that you put up. Like that's the game. So I feel like it's an impossible task to say, oh, we're going to create a reward system that doesn't manipulate or incentive, you know, drive people in one direction or another. That's the nature of the game. You're creating a game, and the game's not the game of life, right? It's the game of whatever scope that you're putting in. So I think it's important to design it so that scope is clear to everyone, you know, and the incentives are aligned with that scope, so that it's not manipulation if it's just a game. Am I being manipulated when we play Monopoly? I don't think so. I'm participating in a game that I'm opting into, that I know the rules and I know what the goals are, and I'm choosing to play it. So I feel like it's probably more to avoid manipulation. You probably just need to communicate effectively and design the system so that it actually achieves the goals of the system. And that would not be manipulating. It's like if we're playing source cred, you know, and the source cred says, hey, do GitHub issues, do forum posts, and make people give you emoji on Discord. That's the game, you know, and unfortunately it might not be perfectly scoped, because now you're just making memes to get those emojis, you know. So and maybe that doesn't actually forward the project. But I don't think you can really get out of manipulating people when you design an incentive system. It's just it's just what you're doing. I'll throw it to Zach.
Yeah, that's really well said. It's funny, it reminded me of when I was a kid. Like there's the board game called Life, and you play the game of life, but how you win is you make the most money. And like this is a message that we get so much, so often, that it's kind of like a default, even programmed into the subconscious. And so we use this phrase a lot, like there's many forms of currency, and try to, you know, reinforce this idea that people's actual lived experience, you know, which is that like there are many ways to keep track of what's valuable. And that was a really important way we tried to frame Coordinate, as like, no, this is all about thanking your peers. It's not about judging how much money they should receive. There's nowhere in the platform that says like one give is worth this much or you got this much. It doesn't show or talk about money anywhere. And you know, I guess the other thing is like, of course, you know, even subtly, anytime you introduce incentives and mechanics, people are going to drift toward gaming them. That just happens. But I also feel like we can, you know, my experience in Coordinate so far is that actually people, and especially people that are collaborating in DAOs, obviously generalizing hugely here, but it attracts the kind of people who are like, oh, what is this game? How are we trying to figure this out? there's a very a very communal spirit in a lot of these DAOs. And you know, in crypto, it's like the base layer is so about being trustless and about like guarding against exploitations, and like this is, you know, it has to be ready for anyone to exploit it. But inside DAOs, we see it's like actually a really trustful system, and that you know, people always ask right away the first thing. It's like, well, how do you keep people from colluding, you know, and how they're going to give to each other? And it's like, well, you know, we have a message for that, but people don't really try to collude, because like they're focused on what the project is. So I guess the point is like, be aware that people will drift toward gaming anything, but also that our experience is that people working on a project together aren't immediately looking to like, how can I get the most give? That's not what their concern is. Their concern is like, great, how do I reward and thank the people I'm with? So don't over engineer like trying to worry about gaming manipulation. Like trust people and they can be trusted.
I want to jump in, and I think that it's easy to, the way that you did that is perfect because it's super subjective. There isn't really games. It's a lot easier to game source cred than it is coordinate, because coordinate is just, hey, do your friends want to give you? Do the people who are around want to give for your value? You know, so the value you created, and that is a tough game to like, you know, game. So I'll throw it to MetaDreamer.
Yeah, so I think in terms of manipulation, it's kind of like, you know, I think it all comes down to like dopamine hits at the end of the day, right? That's kind of how nature operates. It's by, you know, manipulating us with like reward signals and, you know, for different things. And, you know, it can get unhealthy, right? Like according to our brain, you know, it's really good to eat pizza and candy and sugar, but it's not really good for you in the long term. So it has to be balanced as well. But I think in general, the manipulation of our reward systems that we're creating here have like a much better like net positive for humanity than, you know, the current meta, which is like, you know, especially younger generation, like spending, you know, 8 hours a day on Instagram, and, you know, that's their reward system. And, you know, it's kind of like optimized towards like generating ad revenue. And even if you were to like shift 5% of that like human attention away from Instagram into like, you know, solving world issues, then that's like a huge win overall. So I think, you know, there'll be a little bit of like, we have to like play the same game because you have to compete with Instagram for attention of, you know, the younger generation. And so a lot of that, I think it's fine to have these reward systems that manipulate people if people are, you know, actually feeling rewarded and want to be a part of it. And, you know, I think it's like Griff was saying, it's like easy for people to like make those decisions for themselves. Like if they feel manipulated, if they feel like someone's not acting, you know, in good faith and all this stuff, they can, you know, we should design these systems where people have an easy way to like opt out or, you know, like, you know, transfer their reputation elsewhere and go work on something else, or, you know, move between groups. And, you know, because like in a traditional corporation, you have like much more, you're holding a lot more over people's heads, versus in DAOs, you know, you really want a system where people are there because they want to be there, not because they're manipulated to be there. And if they feel like they're manipulated, it's pretty easy for them to get out and go do something else. But yeah, I think like it's different in like bull market versus bear market. But I also think like different people have different needs in different stages. So there's some people where like money is actually the most important thing because they need to like cover their bases, and they can't really do their best work if they're having to worry about, you know, putting food on the table next month. So, you know, for those people, money is actually like a really key thing that, you know, for them, it is important for it to be focused around money being the reward system. And then other people, they have like enough money that they don't have to worry about that. And for them, the reward they need is more so like a feeling of like higher purpose, or, you know, that they're having an impact, or, you know, seeing other people happy, or, you know, giving their money away. You know, I like to say money can buy happiness if you give it away, right? It makes you much happier to do things for other people with your money than to do it for yourself. When you do it for yourself, it's kind of just like temporary happiness, but doing it for other people has like a more permanent effect on your happiness. So I think, at different stages, we should design these systems to accommodate for what different people's needs are. And, in some of the DAOs we're working in, that we've set up systems where like there's like a UBI like baseline for everyone. And then, we use that as like the social like floor. So everyone has like firm footing to stand on. And then on top of that, we have all these like more experimental reward systems that, it's okay if things go wrong once in a while, or we don't figure it out right, because we have that like baseline for everyone to like feel comfortable. And then, on top of that, we can experiment.
Thank you. Yeah,
Really
the chat is.
MetaDreamer, what is this UBI? What community uses that?
So it's something we're piloting in MetaFactory. So basically anyone who's committed to working at least part-time on MetaFactory will get like a base amount of salary. So usually we use a combination of like Coordinate and SourceCred, and the MetaCred prototype I have internally that we're using. But those are all like uncertain, and it does a lot for people's like sort of mental comfort to say that like you're guaranteed to get at least this much every month. And there isn't that anxiety of like, oh, like what if I don't get rated well on Coordinate, or and it starts becoming a distraction rather than the focus. So having that baseline really lets us de-risk doing these experiments on these alternative reward systems.
Yeah, there's a few protocols definitely that are also doing that same thing essentially with Coordinate, is like giving everyone gets a baseline amount of give, so that you have a floor. It's not just like total high wire. I hope I get as much as I need to make my bills. So it becomes more like a bonus structure, a big bonus pool.
For that reason, I don't give Fs in calculus, because it has the ability to affect a student's financial aid. It's like, it's not right.
That's great. There's so much activity in the chat. I want to pick some questions from there. First, I just wanted to share what Nicolene wrote that I think is also opens to another point that we're also starting to talk about, of alternative reward systems. So she says, Andrew inspired me to remind me what I did with my kids. Never reward them, but search for what motivated them to achieve something and what success looks like for them, to make them recognize that they achieved what they wanted to reach. So they set the framework. As here you choose the framework and play your own game. That is what Andrew was talking about too, of when the people have choices about the rules of this game, maybe becomes less manipulative as the engines are transparent for everyone. And I wanted to open, Natalia, do you want to share some of the things you're raising around the cultural frameworks?
Sure. Yeah, I just mentioned that many times we talk about like building the system based on first the community talking about their values and what they want, but also many times they actually don't know what they want. So they say that they want something, then they get it and they're not happy with it because that was actually not what they wanted from the beginning. So yeah, I just wanted to raise the importance of culture within the systems, and culture being supportive of humans actually discovering what they want as we build the systems, and having that space. Like, we don't need to figure it out immediately, right? Like, I think it's really important to bring a component of slowing down and not having to figure it all out immediately. Yeah, and the culture of feedback and dialogue. It's that idea of, yeah, we're figuring it out as we build, and also everything that's happening outside of the systems we're building. So the atmosphere that people are living in, and a lot of what MetaDreamer was talking about, the contexts are going to be different. And it's really important to take that into consideration and have that, that flexibility and spaciousness to hear that, even notice that.
Thanks. Does anyone wants to respond to that?
Yeah, I have a quick thought. Someone posted this in the chat earlier too, but it got me thinking about, this concept of, self-regulation, or kind of stating what you want to accomplish yourself and then getting rewarded if you meet your own goals that you set. I think that can be really effective, because, DAOs have this general issue of, people like come in and be like, oh, what should I do? And it's like, oh, well, no one's going to really tell you what to do. You have to like figure that out. So there's already this need for people to like be self-starters and to like, create their own like things they want to work on, and, figure out how they can provide value. But, tying that into the reward system as well, it's like, it's also a way to help people be more, take more responsibility for their work. Because that's another issue with DAOs, is like, you don't have like, the threat of getting fired over your head. So you're not as like motivated to like, make sure things get done on time, like regularly and consistently. And, we need more mechanisms to ensure that happens. So, even like staking on yourself would be a pretty cool thing. Be like, I'm putting this much down on my own, I'm going to do this work and I'm staking this much on it. And if I get it done, then, I'll get a reward. If I don't get it done, then I burn my stake and it goes to other people who did get their stuff done. I feel like there's some cool design space there to explore in terms of self nominating work to be done, and, using that as a motivation for people to like meet their own goals. And, that's sort of like the most atomic unit of the DAO is the self. And, there's a lot of work we can do to like better govern and reward ourselves first, before we figure out how to do it to each other as well.
And I was just gonna respond that to Griff's point earlier, framing is everything. It's so critical, because it sort of it tells people who they are and what's happening in the system. And I think culture is like the ultimate framing device for people that working together. It's like, how are we around here? And I just really appreciated a lot of things that you were bringing up around how do we slow down? Like, how do we create a culture where listening and being curious is more valued than like having the right answer and jumping in with a solution? And to me, I guess like that zooms out to like really what is the whole point of DAOs. It's like we're shifting this whole paradigm of like a scarcity and winner takes all sort of economic systems and social systems in some way, to saying like, no, we can actually have many forms of currency and many forms of value, and there's lots of ways to contribute and lots of ways to win. So that's, I think I wanted to put in a plug somewhere for like DAOs are a social movement as much as they are a new technology and a new way to organize. And I think it's important we start telling ourselves and others that story too, about like, what are we really doing here with DAOs? It's a culture shift.
If I could say one thing about that, it's also true that there have been DAOs before there was cryptocurrency. Like Alcoholics Anonymous is a very effective DAO. And looking at some of those organizations that have really long histories, I think could be very informative to us in this space as well.
Yeah, for sure. I never thought about that of AA as a DAO. Good point. And I think tying to what you were saying too, Zach, of how we can slow down and find things that are valuable that are happening in other dimensions of the DAO. It ties to Jeff's question of how to capture longer, slower cycle work that doesn't immediately deliver outputs, for example, research and care work, invisible work that builds the space between a community. Does anyone wants to take that question?
I mean, I can say that we are, you know, we're already kind of messing with a version 2 of Coordinate that tries to take on some of that. That instead of giving kind of one-time disbursements or what, like fast money, you know, like grants, ways that you can actually give people streams of income so that they, you know, it's more consistent, more reliable, because a lot of projects obviously don't happen in this same sort of epic cycle. You're working on them for a long time. And I'll also say I've been surprised the way that Coordinate really does capture that hidden work. You know, people will give, usually the dispersions are really quite spread out, you know, with people giving a little bit to a lot of different folks. And I think that's the recognition of, you know, thanks for helping me on that call, or thanks for, you know, this comment you made. Like we really are seeing, if you look at the data that Coordinate comes out, is that people remember all these little things. You know, so when people get like props in the chat and stuff like that, they notice it, and they appreciate it when they have the chance to say thanks to other folks who are doing that kind of weaving work. They will.
Yeah, and I think it's like just like polycentric governance, we need polycentric reward systems. One reward system isn't probably not going to reward all types of labor very well, probably at all. That each one is going to have its little niche. You know, sometimes you just got to pay people a salary. I mean, come on, that's what most people do in this world, right? Or hourly, a salary or hourly. These aren't horrible concepts. You know, it works for most people. We don't have to recreate the wheel on everything, you know? And I really liked just like what MetaDreamer said. It's like, okay, we have basic UBI, which is effectively a salary. It's not really a UBI. It's not UBI for the world. It's just like, oh, hey, you're a part-time contributor. Let me just pay everyone the same. It's a nice, simple solution. We do it at Giveth and the Common Stack. And then you have a reward system on top as well. And I think it's the best way to reward slow, steady work is probably slow, steady payments, and just give them a salary. Sorry to be boring. I'll pass it. I'll pass to Octopus for fun.
Yeah. I think what makes people feel valued is difficult to algorithmize and quantify. And attaching a salary gives them a number, right? But there's a lot more to feeling valued than that. And it's difficult, like, one thing that's difficult about reward systems is psychologically, our perceptions aren't based on what we're actually receiving, they're based on relative what we're receiving. So if everybody got in this room got $100, we'd be really happy. But if everybody got $100 and Griff got 1,000, we'd suddenly be less happy. Even though we were all better off than we were, it would feel less fair and we wouldn't be happy. And that's like, I don't know how to get at that with anything that's quantifiable or algorithmic, but it's going to be something that keeps popping up in these kinds of discussions. And I think the ideal would be if we can develop a toolkit so that as new DAOs are created and as new problems arise, we're not continually reinventing the wheel, that people have like a baseline of, oh, you could use this approach to this type of problem, potentially. And I will pass to, I don't think Hamad has spoken on this topic yet, if I'm correct. So if you have not yet spoken, I pass to you.
I don't have any immediate thoughts. I'll consider myself spoken.
Cool. Yeah, I see, Eli, you have a lot of thoughts in the chat, and I know that you're also building your own reward system. So do you want to share a little bit about what you're thinking?
Hey everyone. Yeah, I don't have too many thoughts to share, but I guess two sort of points of order I've been focused on a lot now are streaming and modularity. And I think both these terms have been touched on a bit. So I guess to save you all rant, I'll just throw those terms out there and hop off for now, because I will just go and not stop. Cheers.
Thank you. And please share here the link you sent me of your reward system and the things you're exploring. I think people will be glad to take a look too. So we can move away for another question that I think involves a lot of what has been spoken of how to capture value and how to bring it into the systems, how to quantify in the right way. So what are good metrics for evaluating the data collected so value flows become visible and amplified? Because I think a big part of reward systems is also making value emerge that wasn't visible before, or bringing value to the attention of people and having this value brought to the awareness. So what are good metrics for evaluating the data? And I'll pass to Andrew first.
What I learned in working on this for several weeks this summer was that I think the best metrics are still being developed, and I don't think any small set of metrics will really capture what people are looking for. So when we were looking at analysis, I initially just jumped on Gini coefficient because that's like the #1 number you use when you're analyzing if a system is fair. But someone correctly pointed out to me that it's not fair to compare like large scale economies to developing small projects. And so even if you use something like Gini coefficient, you need to be very aware of the context. I like Nakamoto coefficient, which is really easy to calculate. It's how many people would have to conspire to hold the majority of the resources. So it's like based in a 51% attack. But I think just like we are continually developing more advanced metrics in every area. And I think there's so much room to develop good metrics here. We use what we have. I think we'll have something much better. I pass to Zach.
Yeah, I think, you know, what metrics to use. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be this basket. It's one of the reasons I'm super excited about the MetaCred project that MetaDream is working on, is that, you know, it's a place to collect all of these sort of different data points, different kinds of rewards, and sort of, you know, have a fuller picture. It's funny, like the question, like what metrics are helpful. I think having some sort of being able to process and have like a conversation. You know, my old company, no one was ever on salary. We only just, after, you know, we would invoice a client and put the invoice in the middle of the table, and whoever worked on the project, we would sort of decide how it should be divided up. It was kind of like an analog coordinate. But the real value in it was the conversations, you know, that we would have. It was like you had to actually have a conversation when someone said, well, I spent like 20 hours on XYZ. It was like, yeah, but like we didn't even use it. You know, the hours aren't the thing. And then we have to have a conversation about like, well, are hours the thing? How much does time factor into how much you should be rewarded for something? So, you know, how we build that into Coordinate is something that's on our mind a lot. Like, you know, you get this data of what the community is currently valuing, and then what is the reflexive mechanism to like, okay, do we actually care about this? What do we care about? What is this showing us? And so I guess this maybe is just like a huge dodge of that question, but like, as we think about metrics, also think about like this qualitative piece where there's a vibe, right? And there just isn't a metric for a vibe, and there isn't a metric for people like feel things are good. You know, what gets measured gets managed. And the second half of that quote is, and the most important things are the hardest to measure. So yeah, a plug for things beyond metrics too, even though they're really important. And that's It's mostly a dodge because I don't know what good metrics are.
Yeah, I mean, subjective human discernment is a powerful thing. You know, it's a nice metric. It's really nice to give people the authority to within their, you know, whatever latitude or reputation they have, or however you want to like give it, just to be like, yo, subjective opinions. I really like that for a lot of things. I don't think it's everything. But it's an important one. Like, you know, maybe you have like source credit is super metrics, right? And then that gets gamed. And if you have a mix of the like hardcore metrics, because in the end, you know, why are you building the reward system? If you're building the reward system to like keep a village going or something, you know, maybe that's a very different scope than actually we have this very specific product that we're trying to launch, and the reward system is funding the people who are launching that product. You know, it's not trying to be the UBI for the community, and so it's hard to really even discuss metrics without scope. And I think it's a lot easier if in a narrow scope to make very specific metrics than it is in a broader scope where maybe the product is a more emergent. You don't actually know maybe it's several products, or it's just a mission in general, and there's a lot of open space to play. Then, you know, subjective human discernment is going to be a way better solution than over metricizing, if that's a word, I don't know. But like doing too much with the metrics.
Yeah, I think like Griff said, it's very like situational, but I think if you are going to have like some sort of global metric, it's almost the meta metrics of like, you know, what, like how can we more effectively like collect data. And so like the one that interests me, or like the few that interest me, is like the time to compensation, or like the time to fund like metric, which is like, as if I like come into a DAO and start contributing, how long before I get some sort of reward for it? You know, if we can like reduce that time to like as small as possible, I think that's really effective. And it starts like, you know, we can learn a lot from game design, where, you know, as soon as you open a game, you're usually like doing the tutorial, and like, you know, it'll be like, oh, chop down this tree, and you chop it down and you get a level, and like it's like almost immediate feedback. And that is like a really powerful mechanism. And I think the faster we can like close these loops between like doing work and getting compensated, the more like rich data and like better contributions and more accurate signal we'll have. Because a lot of the time the issue is the time from like the work being done and the reward being received is like long enough that a lot of context is lost and a lot of information is lost from that time. And then another metric I'd say is like, what percentage of the work being done in this organization is being like covered by the reward mechanisms or the metrics we're measuring. So it's almost like when you're writing software, you have like test coverage, like what percent of this code base is tested. In that same way, you have like coverage on what, like your reward system, what percent of the contributions or valuable work being done does this reward system cover? You know, like Griff said, source cred covers like a very specific niche of metrics that, you know, it's good at what it does, but it's not everything. And, you know, you want to combine like source cred metrics with like coordinate subjective data and all these other things. And, you know, in some DAOs, we're doing things where we use like the source cred score to decide how much give someone gets in coordinate, but the actual allocation is done based on give, you know, so it's like it's like a feedback loop, they feed into each other. And I think it's better for us to collect as much metrics as possible and then curate them afterwards, or like create markets to curate those metrics, because different situations, different metrics will matter in different situations and in different times. But the key important thing is to have as much data there so that in the future we can have like different views or different perspectives on that same underlying data. And you know, in terms of subjective opinions, I think with cryptography, we have a really powerful paradigm in which we can quantify subjective opinion by signing messages, right? If I just make a statement and sign it with my public key, and my public key is, is attached to like all my on-chain actions and like what DAOs I'm a part of. Like there's so much like rich reputation data attached to that public key that then that statement and signing the message with it, that allows you to quantify a subjective opinion, which I think is really powerful. And that's when we'll be able to marry and merge like the the subjective parts and the objective parts and have them like operating within the same system, and for us to be able to like compose and run algorithms on both of them, where it's not necessarily we lose all subjectivity when as soon as we start to like measure and do tokens and try to quantify.
One question from Eli. How do you avoid self-fulfilling prophecies, positive feedback loops, and intersubjective truth about what's valuable?
I would say defining it early and making sure it's real, right? Like, is it like in some ways you want a self-fulfilling prophecy? If you're really scoped well and you're like, hey, we want to build a successful product lots of people use, let's build metrics that bring us towards those self-fulfilling let's build a reward system that makes this actually work. That's the point, right? So I think the challenge is what happens if you're not well scoped, and that's when it's a lot harder, and then you end up into these feedback loops that are maybe not good, and you might get some more mob mentality than like individual truth and a discernment and these things. But in some ways I'm not really answering the question, because I actually am like, well, that's kind of the point. If you can do a good reward system, it will fulfill the prophecy that you're trying to achieve.
I guess one related thing to this is that I see in DAOs is I see a lot of people kind of just replicating decisions or like doing things a certain way just because that's how they were done before. And a lot of the time, especially in DAOs, because things are so chaotic, those decisions were made just as like off the cuff, like this is what worked at the time, just like just to get the shit done and move forward. But a lot of those decisions end up like becoming embedded in the culture and staying around a lot longer just because someone decided to do that one time in that one way. So having, I think, regular or like creating a culture of people to self-reflect, and even within an organization to like question the way that we have been doing things, and introspect in that way, I think can be really valuable, because it lets you sort of criticize and like not sort of assume that things are done a certain way because that's the best way, but figure out how to iterate and do them better, not just kind of repeat the past because it's whatever the status quo was, even within a DAO. And I know DAOs are like, where we're all about like defying the status quo of like legacy, but we still get stuck in those habits, and it's in human nature, if it's not really effective if everyone's just questioning everything all the time. So it's a balance, but I think you do need both. And maybe in SourceCred, for example, every like few months or like 6 months, I think we used to have like a retreat where everyone just kind of like has like a full day to like sit and not do work, but kind of just talk about what's happening, like share their feelings, like kind of see how things are going, see what like wavelength everyone's on, if things are still in sync. And so yeah, I think better like human interactions and sort of cultivating like self-care and sort of emotional labor and all that sort of stuff goes a long way.
Yeah, it's very curious how quick traditions are formed with DAOs and these large organizations. And I think this is a challenge of culture that is always trying to balance tradition with innovation. because you want to respect everything that is being built, but you also want to look for ways to improve it. And then this balance is so delicate to reach, like just resonating with what you said. We have one more question to Andrew. From Jess, can you riff on using raw data analysis and about how we pre-process data from different analysis?
On a high level, I think it's really important. Anything you're quantifying and recording, you realize that's data that could be analyzed later, and try to record it in such a way that it's easy to analyze. And I think that's something that we're realizing. There's not just a process of the reward system, there's also a meta process of thinking about the reward system. And you want to think about, like, how will we know if this is working or not? What kind of analysis will we do? On a second level, there are these issues of what variables are you measuring? For instance, is gender an issue in how the rewards are being distributed? Is introversion versus extroversion an issue in how the rewards are being distributed? It's a really difficult thing to measure because of the nature of crypto space, but I think it's an important question to ask, and you can even look like coding versus memes, etc. What you want to analyze, you need to be sure is clean coming out. It makes it a lot easier. And the third thing, and I want to give this as a like, if future analysts only hear one thing I say, it has to do with a technical thing about when you have lots of categories, try to break them up into subcategories. So we learned this lesson through analyzing impact hours, that if you have a bunch of different buckets, it's really tough to assign the buckets. So maybe if we could do, like, if you're going to have 16 buckets, it's better to break it up into like 4 descriptors and 4 descriptors rather than 16 different descriptors. Does that make sense? That's a really, I mean, I had no clue that was an issue until we tried to do it. But in the spirit of reflection, if anyone ever does this again, when you categorize things, try to make it be like 5 yes/no questions that give you 32 options instead of 32 different menu items. I hope that answers your question, Jess. I hope that's helpful.
So we are approaching the end of our panel, and I wanted to see if anyone from the audience wants to share any thoughts or ask any questions. Everybody enjoying the silence?
So yeah, I would have a question. So I've been now toying around with this tool Token Spice on Ocean Protocol, and it promises you that you can simulate a lot of things. And I was wondering of simulating reward systems in a data union that I'm building. So like simulating how much the people should get, and then maybe let the people also vote on how much the other people should get. But I mean, if I listen to you guys talking today, I think that this is really ambitious and that this might very, very much backfire. I was just wondering to get some feedback. What do you think about simulating all of these reward systems?
I think it's important. I mean, it depends on how well scoped it is, but you can't, it's hard to simulate a lot of human discernment stuff. But I think if you can, it's a heavily metricized one, I still don't know if that's a word, but if it is one of those, then I think it would be very valuable, especially if you have it as part of a token economy and it's being generated in a certain way. I think it's valuable.
I would say also, I think there's a lot of stuff out there that we could look at applying to reward systems, like iterated prisoner's dilemma is something that's really well understood academically. It seems to me like there's a way you could translate that to, like, I'm pro simulation, but a lot of times we also simulate things, and if we had more background, it would be helpful. So I guess I'm trying really hard not to volunteer myself right now, to do a background literature search on how to get started with this. But just like I think simulation with some acknowledgement of other things that might connect to that are already well known would be really awesome.
I think the most effective way it can be done is if there's like a strong feedback loop between the simulation and like the real world application and experiment, and having one inform each other. Like I think, creating models and simulating them in a vacuum from like things that people are actually doing, like it's you can learn a lot of stuff that way, but it's not as useful as like it's not that practical in terms of the real world impact it has and to like people actually making better decisions, because people who are busy doing stuff usually don't have the time to like simulate, and they're more so learning by experimentation. So I think having a way for the people on the ground to experiment and share what they're doing to the simulators, who can then generalize and find patterns, and computers are better at like seeing things from the big picture and from like an objective standpoint than humans are, because humans were always only seeing things from a specific perspective and lens, and we don't have the global viewpoint. So I think this comes back to like collecting really good metrics and data from what's happening in the real world, and then we can use that to inform our simulations and design better simulations, and then take the learnings from the simulations and apply them in real life, and just iterate that way, almost like a AI training.
Yeah, I mean, we are going to distribute this to people who are actually collecting data to train AI. So, I mean, there's like also some connection in this regard, and basically we can do then a change of these rewards continuously, and then see what impact does this have. There's different categories like uploading, annotating, and verifying stuff. So we have different categories, and people would then be rewarded differently. And then we can see after some time, okay, we collect more data, we do the simulation again, we can see how it changes. So it could be an iterating system. So yeah, let's see. But I think, yeah, it will be a challenge, but we will try it for sure.
Thank you, Robin, for jumping in. And thank you so much, Griff, Zach, Andrew, Hamad. It was really great to hear from you today. And I'll pass to Angela to give some final announcements and what is coming next.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. I also enjoyed all the chat messages, I must say. I think we should make them available for everyone, because we had links, we had awesome ideas, we had great proposals there, and I can't wait to dig deeper. So we'll share the materials, the recording, as well as the chat. Stay tuned, follow us on Twitter, governance_DAO, or at the Telegram group. And of course, the discussion on reward systems is not finished. We just started it, and it will be a big topics for the Governauts over the next month. First, I'd like to highlight again that we'll kick off a research program where you all are invited. If you want to take part, please pre-register. James shared the link already a couple of times at tokenengineering.org. And this will be around the question, and I think MetaCred, you summarized it so nicely. Of course, we have such a lot of data available now in these systems, but we have to make use of them in an intelligent way. And it's not only about metrics, it's also about looking at the real world and try to not only think in quantification, but also in these new qualities of these new communities. And I think this is really a big, ambitious mission. We want to make first steps here. And yeah, this is a call to everyone. Take part in this co-research. Let's collaborate here. And I already can see there's such a lot to explore and so many voices and great thoughts here, only in this call. Before we close, I'd like to thank you to Ground Control. This is the team of the Governauts. It's Renzo, Jess, Livy, James, Eugene, and Jeff. So these people are working in the background to organize these events, to organize research around this. And big thank you to you all for investing your time and your energy and passion here to this topic. Thank you so much. And Jess, I think you want to add some more words about the next event coming up, Jessica Sattler.
So yeah, just quickly, so we can maybe even let everybody go a few minutes early. So with this discussion, UBI, which I recently heard from Julio with Circles UBI, also means unconditional basic income, which I thought was a really beautiful way to describe it. So I'm chatting with Julio. There's a Basic Income Earth Network, which is a huge network of UBI projects around the world. So I am recruiting some panelists to discuss this topic and go deeper. So Proof of Humanity, Circles UBI, Good Dollar, and a few others that will be joining, as well as Bia, hopefully from Data Art, who very much strongly feels that every incentive is coercive. So that should be a pretty fascinating panel to hear just some different perspectives. Of course, this is obviously a complicated topic, so super appreciate hearing all of the various reflections and facets of the diamond around this conversation. But yeah, we'll be announcing. So if you want to click follow on Governauts Twitter so you can stay up to date, that should be a really fascinating discussion to add and kind of round out a little different look inside of that part, as Griff mentioned, of kind of like combining these systems. So we'll go a little deeper into the learnings from some of these groups who have been deep in the UBI wormhole, if you will. Thanks, Ange.
Okay, yeah. Stay
And
tuned.
YGG wants to make an announcement quick.
Thanks, everyone. Awesome. Thank you so much to the panelists and everyone here. Really enjoyed this presentation. And this is being picked up by the TEC Labs. We're looking at quantitative rewards models. So we're going to be taking a look at a lot of the systems brought up today. And we're doing about a 6-week series on that in the lab. So that's every Friday for an hour, 9 a.m. PST, 6 p.m. CEST. So it's actually right now. So everyone from the labs was redirected into this call, and we're going to hop back over to Discord to have the first open discussion on how to approach quantitative modeling of these systems. And I posted the link in the chat there. And thanks, everyone, and back to you, Libby.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Perfect. So there you go. T comments, just people mentioning something and the labs get kicked off in a minute. Okay, thanks for sharing, Sean. Thanks everyone for joining. Hope to see you again in our next event and talk soon. Take care.
Thank you. This was excellent.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.